Okay, we'll continue to look at just a couple more examples of simplifying algebraic fractions. But from the previous examples, you hopefully have the idea now, and that is our key is a relative factor, and then look for common factors that we can cancel out. Now, in this video, I want to begin by talking about a type of cancellation that sometimes gives people a little bit of trouble. Generally speaking, the only time you can cancel something out of the top and bottom is when it's exactly the same. There is one exception to that idea, and that would be if you had a fraction like 8 over negative 8. It's not the same number in the top and bottom. One's positive 8 and the other one's negative 8, but we can still cancel those out. And so it's the idea of when you have the opposite in the top, a number or an expression and its opposite in the top and bottom, then we can cancel them out, not to be 1, but to be negative 1. And so as an example, consider 4 minus x over negative 4 plus x. When you look at those two things there, you say, well, they look awful similar. They look awful similar, right? They're not exactly the same, but they do look awfully similar. So we say to ourselves, well, they're not the same, but maybe they're opposites of each other. To see if that's the case, take either the top or the bottom expression and factor out a negative 1 and see if they turn out to be exactly the same or not. Now on the bottom, negative 4, if you factor out a negative 1, it becomes 4. The plus x would become minus x. And then we say to ourselves, yes, they are in fact opposites of each other. And when that happens, we can cancel them out. Now when we cancel them out, we'll get a negative 1 instead of a 1. And so if they look similar, look like they might be the same, you can kind of use that idea of, hey, let's factor a negative 1 out of them and see, are they in fact the same? As another example, consider 4 minus x and 4 plus x. Once again, they're similar, but this time, if you factored a negative out of the bottom, the 4 would turn to a negative 4, the x would turn to a minus x, and then they're almost the same, but not quite. So this here expression, we can't do anything with. It's not the same, and they're not opposites. Now, as you work with these a little longer, you may start to recognize exactly what's going on that makes them opposites. But again, if they just look like it, try factoring out a negative and seeing, does that make them the same? If so, then we can cancel them out, and the result would be a negative 1 for that cancellation. Now, sometimes when we're doing factoring, we might come across a situation where things look like they may be opposites. For example, consider the following problem. 9 minus x squared over x squared plus 5x minus 24. Now 9 minus x squared might look a little different than some things that you've factored before, because you're used to, when you see a difference of squares, you're used to the variable being first. But because the 9 is first, and that is a difference of squares, we can still write that down as 3 plus x, which if you wanted to, you could turn around and write as x plus 3, and 3 minus x. In the bottom, we have x squared plus 5x minus 24, x squared plus 5x minus 24. So we're looking for things that multiply to be negative 24, that add to be a positive 5. After a little bit of searching, you should find that that would be x minus 3, a negative 3, and a positive 8. would multiply to be negative 24 and add to be negative 5, or positive 5. Now as you look across the top here, you have a 3 plus x and a 3 minus x, and then at the bottom you have an x minus 3. So we're using a lot of similar things. So none of these things happen to be the same, but it may be the case that they're opposites. So I look at this x minus 3 and say, well, let me factor out a negative and see if it agrees with either this guy or that guy. Okay, so we can go pull out a negative sign. When I take out a negative sign, that would change the x to a negative x, the 3 to a plus 3, and then the rest of that I'm just leaving alone. So now as I look across the top, I say, well, it's not exactly the same as it, but notice when you have an addition problem, we can rearrange that. That negative x plus 3, you could put the 3 first, and then you have a 3 minus x. And now that is the same exact thing as this. And so we can actually cancel out each of those. They'll cancel to become at negative 1 though, because of the negative that we had to factor out. And now we have 3 plus x and x plus 8. We can't do anything about those. So typically at this point we would put our negative sign on the top. Negative times 3 plus x over x plus 8. If you want to multiply the negative sign through, you could. If you want to just leave it factored out, you can as well. So this is the only kind of little wrinkle. Other than that, simplifying algebraic fractions involves factoring the numerator, factoring the denominator, canceling out anything that's common. Here, though, sometimes you may run into this idea where they're not the same, but they're opposites, in which case you can factor out a negative sign to work it out.